I never imagined I would be telling this story, let alone writing it down. Even now, as I put these words to the page, I feel like I'm betraying not just my husband but the entire structure of the life we built together. That's why I've chosen to remain anonymous. No names beyond the ones I have to give, no specific locations. Just the story, raw, unpolished, and, I suppose, a confession. I've told myself I'm writing this not because I want forgiveness, but because part of me wants people to know what happened, to feel the weight I carry, and perhaps to understand the quiet hunger that lives in places you least expect. I am not proud of what I did. But I won't lie to you either, I don't regret it in the way you might think. It started with Max. No, not a lover, not even a friend, but our tenant. My husband and I owned a small 2-flat property. We lived upstairs, while the lower apartment was rented out. It wasn't the kind of arrangement I had planned when I was younger. I always thought we'd be in a house with a backyard and a picket fence. But life has a way of reworking your dreams until you barely recognize them. The rental helped cover our mortgage, and when Max moved in, he was nothing more than a way to make ends meet. He was younger than us, maybe late 20s, while I was already in my 30s. My husband, absorbed in his work and the endless projects that came with his job, barely acknowledged him beyond the necessary landlord-tenant interactions. But Max had a presence. He had this easy charm, a way of filling a room without trying. He was respectful at first, almost shy, but it didn't take long for me to notice the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. The first time I caught his eyes lingering, I told myself I imagined it. I was married, after all, and maybe I wanted to believe I still had that effect on men. But the second, the third, the fourth time, there was no mistaking it. His eyes followed me, tracked the curve of my hips when I carried groceries upstairs, lingered on my neckline when we spoke at the door. And what unsettled me most was that I didn't shut it down. I didn't look away. Instead, I found myself adjusting my blouse just slightly when I knew he'd be around. I'd take an extra moment with my hair before heading down to get the mail. These weren't deliberate seductions, at least, that's what I told myself then, but tiny rebellions against the boredom of a marriage that had settled into routine. My husband and I still shared a bed, still said, "I love you," out of habit, but the spark had been gone for years. What Max's eyes gave me was something my husband no longer did, the reminder that I was seen. Desired. Alive. One evening, it rained hard, the kind of rain that turns the streets into rivers. The power flickered, and eventually, the building went dark. My husband was working late as usual, and I was left fumbling with candles. That's when Max knocked on the door. He stood there, a flashlight in his hand, rain dripping from his jacket. "Just wanted to check if you were okay up here," he said. Something in his tone, in the way his eyes scanned my face by candlelight, made my stomach twist. Not in fear, but in anticipation. I invited him in, if only because the storm felt louder with just me inside. He sat at the kitchen table, the candlelight softening the edges of his face. We talked, small talk at first, about the storm, about how unreliable the power lines were in this neighborhood. But soon, the conversation slipped into deeper waters. He asked me if I was lonely with my husband always gone. I froze for a moment, caught off guard. That wasn't the kind of question tenants ask their landlords' wives. And yet, there it was, hanging in the air, daring me to answer. I could have laughed it off. I could have said, "Of course not." But instead, I looked down at the flickering flame and whispered, "Sometimes." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, thick with an understanding neither of us dared to name. When he finally left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest rising and falling too quickly. Nothing had happened, not really, but something had shifted. Over the next few weeks, that stormy night became the quiet foundation for something unspoken between us. Max's glances grew bolder. His compliments, though still subtle, carried more weight. And I, God help me, leaned into it. I began to wear dresses I hadn't worn in years. Lipstick I used to save for special occasions. Not for my husband, who rarely noticed, but for the tenant who did. One afternoon, I was hanging laundry on the small balcony that overlooked the backyard. The summer sun pressed down, and I was wearing a sundress, nothing more. Max was in the yard, tinkering with his bike. I bent to pin a sheet to the line, and when I looked down, his eyes were already on me. He didn't look away. I should have turned, should have shut the door, but instead I let him look. For a moment, I let myself bask in the warmth of his attention. And then came the first touch. It wasn't premeditated. At least, I don't think it was. I had gone downstairs to deliver a letter that had been mistakenly put in our mailbox. He opened the door shirtless, sweat glistening on his chest from some workout he must have been doing. I handed him the letter, our fingers brushing. The contact was electric. Neither of us pulled back right away. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a heartbeat too long, we just stayed there. It was nothing. It was everything. That night, I lay awake beside my husband, my skin still buzzing from that accidental touch. I told myself it was harmless, just a moment, but deep down I knew I was standing at the edge of something dangerous. And part of me wanted to jump. I used to think affairs began with a kiss. That moment when lips touched, when two people willingly stepped across the invisible line that separated them from the point of no return. But I was wrong. Affairs don't begin with kisses. They begin long before, in the quiet spaces where desire blooms unnoticed until it is too late. Mine began with the brush of fingers, with eyes that lingered a second too long, with questions I should never have answered. And in the weeks that followed that storm, the weight of those small things grew heavier, more dangerous, until I felt them pressing against my skin even when Max wasn't around. I told myself I could stop it at any time. That I had control, that I was only indulging in the harmless thrill of being noticed. But the truth is, I didn't want to stop. Not yet. One Saturday morning, my husband left early to help his brother with a project. I stayed behind, claiming chores to do around the apartment. It was a lie, though. I had nothing urgent, only an ache in my chest I didn't want to name. By mid-morning, I heard movement downstairs. Max's door creaked open, and I caught sight of him carrying laundry to the basement. A simple act, nothing remarkable, yet I found myself watching from the window longer than I should. His shoulders flexed under the weight of the basket, muscles shifting with ease. When he noticed me, he didn't wave. He just held my gaze, a small, knowing smirk tugging at his lips. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks and quickly pulled the curtain, my heart hammering. I should have gone back to my chores. I should have avoided him. But instead, as if drawn by something beyond reason, I gathered my own small pile of laundry and made my way to the. He asked me if I was lonely with my husband always gone. I froze for a moment, caught off guard. That wasn't the kind of question tenants ask their landlords' wives. And yet, there it was, hanging in the air, daring me to answer. I could have laughed it off. I could have said, of course not. But instead, I looked down at the flickering flame and whispered, sometimes. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, thick with an understanding neither of us dared to name. When he finally left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest rising and falling too quickly. Nothing had happened, not really, but something had shifted. Over the next few weeks, that stormy night became the quiet foundation for something unspoken between us. Max's glances grew bolder. His compliments, though still subtle, carried more weight. And I, God help me, leaned into it. I began to wear dresses I hadn't worn in years. Lipstick I used to save for special occasions. Not for my husband, who rarely noticed, but for the tenant who did. One afternoon, I was hanging laundry on the small balcony that overlooked the backyard. The summer sun pressed down, and I was wearing a sundress, nothing more. Max was in the yard, tinkering with his bike. I bent to pin a sheet to the line, and when I looked down, his eyes were already on me. He didn't look away. I should have turned, should have shut the door, but instead I let him look. For a moment, I let myself bask in the warmth of his attention. And then came the first touch. It wasn't premeditated. At least, I don't think it was. I had gone downstairs to deliver a letter that had been mistakenly put in our mailbox. He opened the door shirtless, sweat glistening on his chest from some workout he must have been doing. I handed him the letter, our fingers brushing. The contact was electric. Neither of us pulled back right away. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a heartbeat too long, we just stayed there. It was nothing. It was everything. That night, I lay awake beside my husband, my skin still buzzing from that accidental touch. I told myself it was harmless, just a moment, but deep down I knew I was standing at the edge of something dangerous. And part of me wanted to jump. I used to think affairs began with a kiss. That moment when lips touched, when two people willingly stepped across the invisible line that separated them from the point of no return. But I was wrong. Affairs don't begin with kisses. They begin long before, in the quiet spaces where desire blooms unnoticed until it is too late. Mine began with the brush of fingers, with eyes that lingered a second too long, with questions I should never have answered. And in the weeks that followed that storm, the weight of those small things grew heavier, more dangerous, until I felt them pressing against my skin even when Max wasn't around. I told myself I could stop it at any time. That I had control. That I was only indulging in the harmless thrill of being noticed. But the truth is, I didn't want to stop. Not yet. One Saturday morning, my husband left early to help his brother with a project. I stayed behind, claiming chores to do around the apartment. It was a lie, though. I had nothing urgent, only an ache in my chest I didn't want to name. By mid-morning, I heard movement downstairs. Max's door creaked open, and I caught sight of him carrying laundry to the basement. A simple act, nothing remarkable, yet I found myself watching from the window longer than I should. His shoulders flexed under the weight of the basket, muscles shifting with ease. When he noticed me, he didn't wave. He just held my gaze, a small, knowing smirk tugging at his lips. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks and quickly pulled the curtain, my heart hammering. I should have gone back to my chores. I should have avoided him. But instead, as if drawn by something beyond reason, I gathered my own small pile of laundry and made my way to the basement. The air down there was damp, carrying the scent of detergent and old stone. He was already by the washing machine, tossing clothes in. His shirt clung to him, damp with sweat from what I guessed had been an earlier run. "Morning," he said, his voice low but steady. "Morning," I replied, setting my basket down. My fingers trembled slightly as I sorted the clothes, though I tried to mask it with a casual air. We worked side by side in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds were the hum of the machine and the occasional rustle of fabric. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Your husband's gone a lot, isn't he?" The question caught me again, like it had during the storm. Direct. Too direct. I should have shut it down, should have told him it wasn't his place. But instead, I found myself whispering, "Yes. He is." Max didn't respond right away. He just nodded, as if confirming something he had already known. Then, softly, he said, "You deserve more than that." I froze. The words hung in the air between us, heavier than anything yet. My heart pounded so loud I thought he might hear it. I turned to look at him, and for the first time, I didn't look away. That was the moment, the exact second when the line blurred. His hand brushed mine as we both reached for the detergent. This time, neither of us pulled back. Our fingers lingered, curling just slightly, as though testing the waters of something we both already knew we wanted. The basement felt smaller suddenly, the air thick. I could smell the faint musk of his skin, the warmth radiating from his body. My breath quickened, and I hated myself for how much I craved that closeness. Then came the near kiss. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine, his eyes locked on my lips. I should have stepped back. Every voice in my head screamed at me to move, to remember who I was, who I belonged to. But my body betrayed me. I tilted, just slightly, enough that his breath grazed my mouth. And then, the sound of footsteps overhead. I jerked back, my pulse racing. My husband's heavy boots. No, thank God, just the neighbor dropping by. Still, the spell was broken. I grabbed a shirt from my basket, clutching it like a shield. Max straightened, his expression unreadable. But as I turned to leave, he whispered, "It doesn't have to stop here." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I fled up the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When I reached our apartment, I collapsed against the door, breathless and trembling. Nothing had happened, not really, but it had almost happened. And the terrifying truth was, I wanted it to. That night, lying beside my husband, I couldn't sleep. My skin burned with the ghost of Max's almost touch, my lips tingled with the memory of what almost was. My husband snored softly beside me, unaware that his wife was drowning in thoughts of another man just a floor below. Over the next few days, I avoided Max as best I could. I told myself it was over, that I had come to my senses. But avoiding him only made it worse. The silence stretched, thick with all the things left unsaid. And in that silence, my mind replayed the basement moment again and again, until it felt less like an accident and more like a promise. The breaking point came a week later. I was returning from the market, arms full of bags. One slipped, and apples rolled across the sidewalk. Before I could stoop to gather them, Max appeared, crouching beside me, his hands brushing mine as we both reached for the same fruit. We laughed, too loudly, too nervously, but neither of us moved away. His hand lingered on mine, firm this time, deliberate. My breath caught. The world around us blurred, and for a moment, it was just the two of us crouched on the pavement, tethered by something stronger than restraint. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let me take one bag for you." I nodded, unable to speak. He carried it upstairs, following me into the apartment. The air inside felt charged, every second stretching unbearably. He set the bag down on the counter, then turned to face me. There was no smirk this time, no playful pretense. Just raw intent. "I can't pretend anymore," he said quietly. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might break through my chest. I wanted to tell him to stop. I wanted to tell him this was madness. But the words caught in my throat. And when he stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body, I didn't step back. I don't know how long we stood there, caught between right and wrong, duty and desire. But I know this, in that moment, I had already chosen. The kiss hadn't happened yet. But the affair had already begun. I had always imagined betrayal as something loud. A shattering of vows. A dramatic moment you could pinpoint, like lightning striking a tree. But when it finally happened, it was quiet. Soft. Almost tender. That was the part that shook me the most. Max set the grocery bag down on the counter, his chest rising and falling with an intensity that mirrored my own. The apartment felt smaller with him inside it. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of everything we hadn't said, everything we had allowed to fester between us. I told myself to speak, to say something that would push him back across the invisible line we had been towing for weeks. But when I opened my mouth, no words came. Only silence, only surrender. He stepped closer. I could smell him, soap and sweat and something uniquely his. My pulse raced, and my hands gripped the counter behind me, as though anchoring myself against a tide I knew was coming. Then, without hesitation, he reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed my cheek, lingering there. The touch was feather-light, but it burned all the same. "You know I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered. I should have said, "Stop." I should have laughed it off, pretended it was a joke, sent him back downstairs with a polite smile. That's what a faithful wife would have done. But I wasn't that wife anymore. Not in that moment. Instead, I whispered back, "I know." The words slipped out before I could catch them. And once they were spoken, there was no turning back. His lips found mine. It wasn't rushed, wasn't forceful. It was slow, deliberate, a kiss that asked permission even as it demanded everything. My breath caught as the warmth of his mouth pressed against mine, sending a shiver down my spine. I melted into it, my fingers releasing the counter to clutch at his shirt. For weeks, I had imagined what it might feel like, but imagination paled against reality. The kiss was electricity and fire, sweetness and sin. It was the kind of kiss that unraveled me, thread by thread, until I no longer remembered why it was wrong. When we finally pulled apart, I gasped, my chest heaving. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with hunger. "This is madness," I whispered, though my voice betrayed no conviction. He smiled, that same dangerous smile I had seen flicker across his face before. "Then let's be mad together." And he kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. My body pressed into his, the counter digging into my back as his arms wrapped around me. His hands explored the curve of my waist, the line of my back, as if memorizing me. I responded in kind, my fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, closer still. Every part of me screamed that this was wrong, but my body, my betraying, starving body, wanted more. The kiss deepened, grew urgent. My breath hitched as his mouth trailed to my neck, leaving a trail of heat in its wake. I tilted my head, allowing it, craving it. "Max," I whispered, half in warning, half in plea. "Max," I whispered, half in warning, half in plea. But his hands gripped me tighter, and my own betrayed me further, clutching him with equal desperation. Time blurred. I don't know how long we stood there, tangled in the kind of embrace that strips away reason. Minutes, hours. It felt eternal. It felt like I had been waiting my whole life for that moment, even though I knew it could destroy everything I had built. At some point, we pulled back just enough to look at each other. His eyes burned into mine, searching, questioning. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. "No," I breathed, "not yet." That was enough for him. Enough for both of us. We kissed again, slower this time, as though savoring the forbidden fruit we had finally tasted. Each brush of lips, each stolen breath, was a dangerous kind of bliss. Eventually, reality crept in, the sound of a car door slamming outside, the faint reminder that the world still existed beyond our small bubble of sin. I pulled away, my hands pressing against his chest, though weakly. "You have to go," I said, though every fiber of my being wanted to keep him there. He hesitated, his eyes locked on mine. "This isn't the end." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My body still hummed with the memory of his touch, my lips still tingled from his kiss. I knew he was right. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. When he finally left, I collapsed against the counter, my knees weak. I pressed my fingers to my lips, as though trying to hold on to the memory of what had just happened. That night, lying in bed beside my husband, I couldn't erase Max's touch from my skin. My husband reached for me out of habit, his hand resting on my hip, but it felt foreign. His touch no longer ignited anything in me. Because now I knew what it felt like to burn. In the days that followed, the tension between Max and me grew unbearable. Every glance was charged, every accidental touch deliberate. We no longer pretended to be strangers bound only by the terms of a lease. We were co-conspirators in a secret that pulsed beneath the floorboards of our building. It wasn't long before the kisses became more frequent, stolen moments in stairwells, lingering goodbyes at doorways. Each time, we pushed a little further, tested the limits of what we could get away with. And each time, I fell deeper into the madness. I told myself it was temporary. That it was just an escape from the loneliness my marriage had become. That once the thrill wore off, I would stop. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had opened a door that could never be closed again. And I didn't want it to be. By the time the first kiss was behind us, pretending became impossible. Every glance carried weight. Every touch, whether accidental or deliberate, felt like an unspoken promise. We had crossed into dangerous territory, and though I told myself I could still retreat, the truth was simpler, I didn't want to. I began living two lives. By day, I was the wife, the careful keeper of a household. I cooked, I cleaned, I asked my husband about his day when he came home late, though I already knew his answers by heart. Our marriage had settled into a rhythm, predictable as clockwork. On the surface, nothing seemed different. But beneath it, in the stolen hours when no one was watching, I was something else. I was alive. Max and I didn't dive into bed immediately. That would have been too simple, too reckless. No, we danced around it first. Lingering kisses in stairwells, hands brushing against each other in the hallway. A whispered word here, a teasing glance there. Each encounter was gasoline, and with every passing day, we grew more careless about striking the match. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the fire finally caught. 3 soft raps, not the loud, careless knock of a delivery man, not the impatient hammering of a neighbor. 3 measured, deliberate taps. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Max stood there, his eyes darker than usual, his jaw set in a way that made my stomach twist. He didn't speak, not at first. He just looked at me, a look that said everything words couldn't. I stepped aside. He walked in. The door clicked shut behind him. For a moment, we just stood there, facing each other in the dim light of the hallway. The silence was thick, every heartbeat echoing in my chest. Then, without hesitation, he closed the distance. His mouth was on mine before I could think, before I could even breathe. This kiss wasn't careful, wasn't tentative. It was hungry, desperate, the kind of kiss that consumed everything in its path. My back hit the wall, his hands braced on either side of me, caging me in. I gasped against his lips, my hands clutching at his shoulders. Every nerve in my body screamed, not in protest, but in surrender. This was it, the point of no return. "Max," I whispered, though it came out broken, as though I was begging for more rather than less. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against my mouth. But I didn't. I couldn't. My silence was permission enough. We stumbled toward the living room, lips never parting, hands exploring with a desperation born of weeks of restraint. His fingers trailed down my spine, sending shivers through me. I clung to him as though letting go would shatter me. The world outside ceased to exist. There was no husband, no marriage, no promises. There was only us, the tenant and the landlord's wife, lost in a storm we had no intention of escaping. When his lips left mine and traveled down the line of my throat, I let out a sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. It was raw, unfiltered, the sound of a woman who had been starving without even realizing it. He whispered my name like a prayer, and I answered it with my body. The first time we gave in completely, it wasn't polished or perfect. It was rushed, frantic, almost clumsy in our urgency. Clothes discarded hastily, hands fumbling as though afraid the world might end before we got what we wanted. But beneath the chaos was a current of something undeniable: need. When it was over, we lay tangled together, our breaths ragged, our bodies slick with sweat. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was terrifying in its clarity. I had done it. I had betrayed my husband in the most irreversible way possible. Max's arm draped across me, his chest still heaving. He pressed a kiss to my temple, soft and almost tender. "I've wanted this since the first time I saw you," he whispered. His confession should have filled me with guilt. And it did, but not enough. Not enough to drown out the warmth that spread through me at his words. When he finally left, I showered, scrubbing my skin as though I could erase the evidence. But no amount of soap could wash away the truth. That night, my husband came home late, smelling faintly of whiskey and cigarettes. He kissed me absently before collapsing into bed. As he drifted into sleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I should have been racked with shame. I should have felt sick to my stomach. And part of me did. But alongside the guilt was something darker, something more dangerous: satisfaction. Because for the first time in years, I felt alive. Desired. Needed. And I knew it wouldn't be the last time. Over the next weeks, the affair became a rhythm of its own. We stole moments whenever we could. A quick kiss on the stairwell when no one was around. His hand brushing mine as we passed each other in the hallway, a silent reminder of the fire we'd shared. Sometimes, when my husband was away, Max would slip upstairs, and we'd lose ourselves in each other until the world outside blurred to nothing. It was reckless, insane, but the danger only added to the thrill. I became an expert liar. I learned how to hide the flush in my cheeks, how to mask the faint scent of his cologne with perfume, how to smile at my husband without letting my eyes betray me. The lies came easier than I expected, rolling off my tongue like second nature. But the lies weren't the worst part. The worst part was how little I missed my old life. The more time I spent with Max, the more my marriage felt like a hollow shell. My husband's absence no longer stung, it was a convenience, an opening. His indifference, which once wounded me, now gave me the freedom I needed to continue what I had started. And so, day by day, the line I had once guarded with vigilance disappeared entirely. I was no longer a wife who had slipped once. I was a woman living a double life. And I didn't want it to stop. When I sit down now to write this, faceless, nameless, hiding behind the thin veil of anonymity, I do so with the kind of trembling honesty only secrets can summon. This is not a confession I would ever say aloud in a church pew, nor a drunken slip at a bar, nor whispered into my husband's ear while he sleeps. No, this is the kind of truth that lives only in silence, or else finds its way onto a page like this, where strangers can read it, judge it, maybe even understand it. Because to understand me, you'd have to understand what it feels like to be seen again after years of invisibility. To be wanted not out of duty, not because of vows spoken a decade ago, but because someone looked at you and wanted you with an urgency that left no room for doubt. That someone was our tenant. And as much as I wish I could tell you that I stopped, that I shook myself awake from that fever, remembered the man I married, and walked back into the safety of my vows, I didn't. I didn't stop. I didn't pull away when I should have. I didn't push him off when his hands slid over me in ways my husband hadn't touched me in years. I didn't close the door when temptation knocked. I opened it wider. The strange thing is, the more time passed, the less guilty I felt, not because it was right, but because it filled something hollow in me that had long been starving. My husband, God bless him, is a good man. He works, he provides, he trusts, but he doesn't see me anymore, not the way I need to be seen. And when someone else did, when the tenant's eyes lingered, when his breath grew uneven near mine, I fell into that gaze like a woman desperate for air. There were nights when I'd lie awake next to my husband, the tenant's taste still on my lips, and wonder how long I could live like this. The duplicity should have crushed me, but instead it lifted me. It made me alive in ways I hadn't been in years. It was reckless, selfish, intoxicating. And yet, it was also terrifying. Every time my husband laughed with him in the living room, or handed him rent money, or slapped him on the back with that easy camaraderie, my stomach clenched. I wondered if he could smell me on him. I wondered if my flushed face gave me away. I wondered if my guilt was loud enough to be heard. But somehow, miraculously, tragically, it never was. The tenant and I became experts in discretion. We crafted a language of glances, of silences, of touches stolen in the shadows of ordinary days. A brush of fingers when dishes changed hands. A too long pause when passing in the hallway. Nights when my husband snored, and I slipped quietly into the tenant's room, heart pounding, body already aflame. I'd return before dawn, crawling back into the bed I'd made with vows I no longer honored. And there he would be, my husband, sleeping peacefully, unaware that his wife was living a second life just a few steps away. If you think I'm proud of this, I'm not. If you think I regret it, I don't. What I feel is harder to name. It's a tangle of shame and thrill, love and lust, deceit and discovery. It's the paradox of being both sinner and survivor, betrayer and woman. Reborn. Some will read this and damn me. Others will read it and secretly nod, knowing too well the ache of being unseen in their own marriages. That's why I write, not for forgiveness, not for pity, but because silence is heavy and secrets rot if they're kept too long. I am anonymous because I have to be. My husband still doesn't know. He never caught us, not once, not even when the danger was so sharp I swore it must be written all over my skin. He is still with me, still blind, still trusting. And maybe one day, when the tenant is gone and the years have dulled the memory, this will all feel like a dream I once had. But I know the truth. And now, so do you. This was my story, my confession, my adventure, my sin. I didn't stop. This story is a work of anonymous fiction-style confession created for mature audiences only. It is intended for entertainment and storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or real-life situations is purely coincidental. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of My Husband's Tenant Wanted More, and I Didn't Stop, a true infidelity story. Stories like this aren't always easy to tell, but they reveal the raw, hidden sides of love, marriage, and desire that many people keep locked away. If this story kept you turning the page, then don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and stay connected so you never miss the next true story of passion, betrayal, and hidden secrets. Every week, more untold confessions and shocking adventures are shared right here, each one guaranteed to make you think, feel, and question. Subscribe now, comment your thoughts, and share this story with others who enjoy powerful narratives about love, temptation, and the risks we take when no one is watching. Your support means the world, and it's what keeps these stories alive. Until the next confession, thank you for being here.